Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this COVID legal compliance session run by Kaizen Synergy Law Firm. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Director and General Counsel here at Kaizen Synergy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. So today's session focuses specifically on when workplaces shut quickly because of an agency lockdown. And we're also going to be covering off pay, leave, and stand down requirements that your agency needs to be aware about in terms of its fair work compliance obligations. The challenge of why we are actually running these webinars is because of the changing legal updates that we're seeing in 2022. Last week, I put up this diagram and said it's not a linear legal definition or challenge of what you're actually viewing when dealing with COVID within the workplace. You can see it can become very complex very quickly when we're actually looking at these individual issues. And essentially, some of the recommendations we made was to review these slides and update your policies within your agency. And if you obviously have any questions, then you can contact our legal firm directly on either the 1300 number, my mobile number directly, which has been made available on the webinars since February 2019, and also looking at accessing our resources via the support@gemba360.com email address. And we mentioned that we will be expanding the workplace laws and investigation around these this week and into the next few months as well too. So when we look at coronavirus and Australian workplace laws, we did start to look at some of the key requirements and the changing rules of what we are seeing around the country. I will add that this information has been taken directly from key government websites and also Fair Work website information directly as well. What we will be doing during this legal webinars is to in fact build upon some of these requirements and also directions that these various government agencies and also Fair Work have advised agencies on. So without going through all of last week's session, we did cover off in summary vaccinations, testing, and the workplace. We did cover off specific requirements that your agency needs to look at in terms of whether you can require employees to be vaccinated, what the public health orders around this, agreements and contracts, lawful and reasonable directions, and also what does it mean for evidence in terms of vaccinations that your personnel do need to follow. So certainly as part of this, we did look at all of the changing rules. Now, leading into this week, what we are seeing is in fact the when workplaces shut down quickly because of a lockdown, as well as pay leave and stand down requirements. And as we mentioned right at the start of this webinar, we are going to unpack all of the workplace requirements throughout the next few weeks. And this is going to be important for yourselves in your agency throughout 2022 when you are looking at COVID workplace legal compliance obligations. There is a lot to look at, there is a lot to consider, and no doubt this is why people are so confused within agencies. We have been working with cases that have been brought before Fair Work or initiations of people that have felt unjust, unharshly treated within the workplace, and also a number of cases where there have been potential class actions that have all come up. In each situation, we have actually been able to work with agencies and actually minimize or mitigate completely these issues before they actually arise. So with it, the knowledge that we're actually talking about here actually comes from real case situations that our law firm has actually been involved directly in. I will add that if you want to have a look at some of the resources that are available to you, then you can obviously go directly to our website at kaizensynergy.com and view specific information around the works that we have actually undertaken. And also, if you like, you can also look at past webinars directly on our Gemba 360 YouTube channel. We are also opening up the dashboard for all agencies, the Gemba 360 dashboard, which is where all of these resources will actually be loaded in for you to be able to use. And you all have access to the Gemba 360 dashboard. And it is something that we have opened up. You can have a look at the individual modules that I will be talking about today and go through over the next few weeks, specifically around the human resources section, which is critically important for agencies. But also, you can also equally have a look at our pricing charts that we have included. And one of these is to actually open these up specifically for all not-for-profit agencies, where you do actually get a single license to use the Gemba 360 platform, and there isn't any monthly fee or setup cost. There is obviously if you open these up to use the other modules, and it is something that we have quite openly advertised over the last couple of years and onboarded thousands of agencies into the Gemba 360 dashboard to allow them to start to get the resources needed that we are talking about in these legal compliance webinars that we run from week to week. Now, that said, let's have a look at some of your obligations that you need to be aware of from a compliance point of view. Now, as of updates from February the 7th, 2022, which has only been in the last couple of weeks, essentially what we are seeing is that while the COVID vaccination rollout happens across Australia, temporary lockdowns of certain industries or workplaces may continue. What we are finding also, which I will add, and you will experience this as well too, that some agencies are actually going into their own lockdowns irrespective of what government departments are actually issuing. And that may well be because of work health and safety requirements or HR requirements that they need to ensure a safe work environment for their actual personnel and staff. Now, when we look at fair work obligations, what does it mean when workplaces shut quickly because of a temporary lockdown? Well, there are a number of measures that your agency needs to consider. And we're going to go through these individually around this. And as I mentioned, it is going to be quite challenging to address all of these issues. Now, where we're going to go into around this is to break this down specifically to cover each of these areas off so your agency is better informed about what your HR compliance obligations are in relation to COVID safety. Where we're going to lead into is looking at returning to the work and workplace next week. And this will, if I jump to the slides right at the end, thank you, here we go. What we are going to look at directly is how you would reopen your workplace after a temporary closure, how you look at scaling up your operations and adapting your workplace as well too. Now, this will cover agencies that may sit in the family violence space. This may sit in agencies under NDIS services, or even agencies that provide Aboriginal and community controlled services, but also generally the not-for-profit space and community service organisations, where you may well be volunteer-based and work all around the country. As a support works, our law firm has supported agencies within the not-for-profit space, certainly over the last couple of years around this COVID works, specifically where they have been focused on family violence, community services, Aboriginal community control services and the likes, And really what we've seen is systems that actually work based on what we're talking about here. And that's what we're going to build on. So when we look at what happens when workplaces shut quickly, we're not actually moving and talking about the pandemic orders at the moment that the governments may issue. What we're actually going to be looking at here is what happens if a staff member needs to take care of a child, or what happens if you need to change your duties and working hours for staff. Is there an obligation for you to actually ensure that staff can still work from home during this time? What are your fair work obligations? And when we're talking about this, we're talking about, we will give you real life situations where we've actually had situations where things may have been escalated up into fair work, but essentially either they've been kicked out of fair work or essentially squashed before it's even got to that situation whatsoever. The idea is that we're going to stone across into returning to work, but we do need to cover off what is your agency's pay, leave, and stand down options or obligations if you need to essentially shut your agency quickly this year. So let's go and have a look at this now from a legal compliance obligations. Now, one of the things that we get asked a lot over the last few years, can we stand down staff simply because they're not showing up to work? So essentially, employers may be able to stand down employees down without pay during a sudden workplace closure that is outside the employer's control. For example, you may be able to stand down employees when the business has closed because of obviously an enforceable government direction, which means the employee can't be usefully employed even from another location. There's a stoppage of work due to a lack of supply as well too. And it essentially means that you can't stand down people if it's not within this specific parameters that you might have.
Now, when we have a look at how employees should discuss what these government directions actually are, essentially, employers should first discuss and communicate with employees about a stand down. Now, Fair Work have given examples of a stand down checklist, and I've actually included that on here. What we have done is also add to it. So we've actually taken the Fair Work direction and the employer checklist and also updated this and added some further information into it for you as well too. So these can include options available to employees where people may be able to work from home. They may change duties, hours of work or rosters, or taking paid or unpaid leave. Now, the idea is that Fair Work, as I mentioned, has a before standing down employees employer checklist, which is really designed to for employers to make sure you've considered all the options before standing somebody down. Now, what we have done for you, and I'll just use this here, and let's make this slightly bigger. Here we go here, is to bring this into a Word document for you and also essentially give you literally a checklist tool that you can use offline. And it will be available to you on your Gemba notice board as well too, and in the documents part of your section. Now, essentially with it, it also includes specific references around what we look at from a legal compliance point of view and expanded as part of the Fair Work checklist. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, essentially, when you look at the Fair Work checklist, it does talk about obligations on employers to ensure that you've considered specific requirements that your agency needs to have. So that might include things like ensuring you have working from home arrangements or changes to duties or hours of work or rosters, and also accessing paid or unpaid leave. And what does that actually look like? But what we have also added in here is actually things that employers need to have. So you may want to consider not only, well, if people are working from home, but what is the work health and safety requirements? Now consider that if somebody is working from home, then their workplace may actually now be considered to be an office site. And this hasn't actually been considered previously, and hasn't been in the forefront of employers' kind of thoughts when people are saying, oh, yes, let's work from home. But what if there is an injury at home? How do you actually do this? And how do you actually manage these requirements? Well, what you'll find, and let me just jump back into the Gemba notice board, for the Gemba system for you. What you will find is that we have given you things like workstation assessment and working from home forms. Now, these workstation assessment forms you can actually use to actually assess the validity and safety of a person's workplace and office place where they're going to work. And these are things for your agency to actually consider before actually sending somebody home. The other part that Fair Work does talk about is rosters and work instructions and the likes. Now, what we have actually put in here is essentially a work form that a lot of agencies have adopted. The idea is that you've got the list of the total hours agreed to work each week. You've got what they're going to do as part of their task, and essentially a diary of what they've actually had. So this essentially becomes a work instruction that you can use within your agency. And where this comes into it is that Fair Work actually puts in and says that you also do need to actually record not only the hours that people are working from home, but also document this down. But this wasn't actually included very clearly within the checklist. So we actually expanded this out so that you're meeting your legal compliance obligations. And this is a document. We can see a few questions that people are actually asking. Yes, we will circulate this around for you to start using today within your agency as well too. And you can change this if you like as well, and also utilize this in any shape or form. So essentially the checklist is there and allows you to manage this. Now, what Fair Work did say was that some employers may need to introduce working from home arrangements during temporary lockdowns. Employers and employees should consider their specific circumstances before coming to an agreement about working from home, and they should consider whether any previous work from home arrangements can be reinstated for the period of the lockdown. What you will also need to consider, as detailed by Fair Work, is also the awards, enterprise agreements, employment contract, and workplace policies. And on top of that, record keeping obligations, as detailed by Fair Work, continue to apply to you even when employees are working from home. So what this record keeping obligations means is that you not only have to keep time and wages records, but also be very clear that Fair Work inspectors may actually ask you to show you this information, and you need to keep this information for a minimum of 7 years from the date that it started. So this is not something that you can just keep for a short period of time. It is actually something you need to keep for at least 7 years. And you may be called on this information. Now, this is something that is coming directly out of Fair Work. And equally, what happens if records aren't kept? Well, if records aren't kept or are incorrect, then Fair Work inspectors can give employers a fine called an infringement notice. And it is unlawful for employers to make or keep employment records that they know are false and misleading. Now, I will add that in some states as well too, like Victoria, there is additional document management requirements that your agency does need to follow. And this is covered under actually the Crimes Act. And there is a requirement that you must keep evidence and when I say evidence, documents that could be used in legal proceedings for a minimum of at least 7 years in terms of where it is since it's been identified. Now, this means that you cannot destroy, dispose, conceal, render undecipherable, or incapable of identification. So together, what we're actually seeing is that when staff work from home, and when you're thinking of having staff work from home, even if it's on an ongoing basis or for a temporary period of time, then you need to manage what record keeping obligations you have within your agency. And it is for actually this reason that some of these key forms that Fair Work have focused on, we have put on your Gemba dashboard, so that way you can actually start using these today and ensure that you're meeting your minimum workplace compliance obligations, even if people are working from home. And the idea is that with this, of course, because Gemba can actually be accessed directly and securely by your agency, and it doesn't matter where people are actually working from, they can essentially log in from any of their sites that people are working from and access your company dashboard. And it becomes a very simple way to ensure you're meeting your legal compliance obligations. Now, as part of the going to work during a lockdown, some workers may still be able to attend their workplace. For example, this may be because their workplace provides an essential service, such as manufacturing, freight, or healthcare. And this has been broadened, should I say, to include some community services, professional services as well too, disability services as well. But also, I will add to that group is also people that work in family violence services and that particular domestic violence part of the sector. The rules that depend on several factors include whether a business is allowed to operate, the kind of work being performed and whether it can be done from home, or whether an employee has been vaccinated against COVID-19. Now, an agency can't require employees to attend work if it's not allowed under an enforceable government direction. Now, what we are seeing at this year as opposed to last year, and I'm not saying that this wasn't the case last year, but essentially now where people have been vaccinated or they've had to go into isolation because they need to take care of a child or themselves have come into close contact with COVID and need to quarantine. So if an employee can't return to the workplace because they need to care for a child whose school or childcare centre has closed, then under Fair Work, it says that they should come to an arrangement with their employer, being your agency. Now, this could include requesting to work from home or taking some form of leave. Examples could include annual leave or long service leave, but normal leave application processes still apply. Now, what we are finding though, and I will just cover this and I will jump to the quarantine and isolation, but you need to be aware of what the paid carers leave and unpaid carers leave means. Paid carers leave is available to full-time and part-time employees when they need to look after a family member or a member of their household who needs care to support a personal illness, injury, or unexpected emergency. And there is a broader definition of what an unexpected emergency is. Casual employees are entitled to 2 days of unpaid carers leave per occasion. Full-time and part-time employees can take unpaid carers leave if they have no paid sick or carers leave left. Now, unexpected emergencies is where an unforeseen or sudden and urgent event or situation arises. We have seen this in a number of cases, particularly with migrant resource centres lately and other community services where unexpected emergencies has come up. This is included where the employee has had an emergency, a public health order has come in, there's been a number of close contacts within the agency or let's say reception has been exposed to COVID-19 and the agency has had to immediately shut the service directly. What this means is that employees and alternate work arrangements need to be consistent with the employee's terms and conditions of their employment. This includes any award or enterprise agreement that applies, and an award or agreement could include rules about changing rosters or hours and penalty rates for working outside the normal span of hours. What is important to note is that employees can't be required to reduce their hours or to work flexible work hours that involve, for example, catching up on work when their child is asleep as an alternative to taking carers leave. An employee has to give you reasonable evidence of the unexpected emergency if it is that has arisen on their end, and this also applies to situations relating to COVID-19. Now, applying this to quarantine and self-isolation is where we find ourselves really in 2022. Now, where employees can't go to work if they need to quarantine or self-isolate, for example, because they have COVID-19 or are close contacts or needing to get tested. And so essentially what you will find this year is that there may well be this cycle where people need to either go into quarantine or self-isolate. And one of the areas that we're finding a lot of work that agencies need to look at is around the policies that you need to have to actually manage this within your agency. So there may well be cycles where people actually may need to go into quarantine. They've tested negative, they've come out of quarantine, they've come back into and they've had a close contact, and they may need to go back into quarantine again, depending on what the rules are for your specific state. Now, you may also have changes to employees' working conditions, and as part of that, employers under Fair Work will need to consider what alternative arrangements may be suitable for their workplace. And this might actually be that you're changing your hours or rostered off work, asking employees to work extra shifts or longer hours, or changing employees' duties. And again, before you introduce these changes, agencies do need to consider what rules might apply under Fair Work and any other award or other employment contract. And it is for this reason that Fair Work have kept on saying you do need to seek independent legal advice in the event that you need to go down this path. And we have worked with a lot of agencies after hours and extended hours in terms of where they needed to make quick decisions and where changes do need to occur very, very promptly as well too. So certainly if you do need to do so, reach out to us. We're more than happy to have these discussions with you and advise you on even what other agencies have done in similar situations that you may find yourself as well too. So with that, obviously with border closures and pay options, and if there are border closures that may occur, then some residents of affected states or territories may not be able to attend work. And again, this is something your agency needs to follow. Now, where to next week? Well, we are going to be looking at what happens and planning the return to work. This was really the stepping stone into this space that we're going to be looking at next week. Fair Work, in looking, if we're going to crystal ball at the moment, Fair Work encourages employers and employees to work together as they transition back to work. And you might hear me laugh around this because when I say that, it's sometimes very, very difficult because people are often coming at this from two different angles. So when people are coming back to work, it isn't as simple as having a simple transition plan. What it means is that you need to actually advise people very, very early on. What is the actual expectations to coming back to work? How do you communicate that to your personnel, not just paid staff, but also volunteers? If you are working across multiple states, that a lot of agencies do, you might find that some groups, because of different rules, that they're coming back to the workplace much quickly, or some people are continuing to work from home. So again, how you actually communicate that to your personnel needs to be carefully considered. We are going to be looking at next week the safe workplaces, and not only just the idea of coming back to work, but what systems, what procedures do you need to have in place in order to effectively manage this process. And this was something that we did take from the Department of Health in terms of their diagrams and lift this up as well too. Equally, we will be looking at COVID safe plans, capacity, record keeping, which you will hear us repeat time and time again, and also the rules of face masks, which have already changed, but we are going to look at this from a work health and safety point of view and what you may need to consider. So as we move to next week, one of the things, three of the areas we're going to be looking at is reopening your workplace after temporary closure, scaling up operations and adapting your workplace to the needs that you might need to have. We will also be opening up, as I mentioned, access to the COVID Safe Legal Dashboard, which a lot of you already utilize as well too. The resources will be placed in there for yourselves to actually access and the likes as well. We do encourage you to actually jump onto our website where you can view a lot of these other resources as well too, and you can also directly access the Gemba dashboard by simply going to Gemba 360 and clicking on click here to go to Gemba dashboard directly itself. If there are any questions, more than happy to stay online and answer any questions that you might have. If you are watching this recording after today's live session and you want to either reach out to us because of questions or alternatively get access to the Gemba 360 dashboard, then by all means, please contact us on 1300 360 360 or email us at support@gemba360.com.